How are you doing? I feel the number of non-Japanese citizens living in Japan for many years who go through the procedure of naturalization in Japan has increased these days. So recently, one of my friends from Canada who has lived in Japan for many years naturalized in Japan, and he finally got Japanese citizenship. And speaking of naturalization in Japan, it is one of the most difficult immigration procedures to be accepted. And applicants must abandon their original citizenship based on the Japanese Immigration Act that doesn't give them permission to have multiple citizenship. So applicants who apply for naturalization in Japan must be prepared for living in Japan for the rest of their life. And I think probably this is not one of the few examples that hardly happen in Japan. Things that I feel this way is that there are so many non-Japanese residents walking around the street whenever I wander around the downtown area in Tokyo. So apparently they're not tourists. They're not tourists, but they are expats or residents living in Japan permanently. So there are white people and black people and Southeast Asian people and Polynesian people and so on. And of course, the number of immigrants in Japan is fewer than that of other Western countries. But Japan is steadily getting close to a melting pot country that exists wide variety of people and wide diversity that gradually becomes a distant from homogeneous country. So more or less, acceptance of immigrants in economic advanced country is a kind of obligation, I think. And the reality of diversity acceptance that forces Japan to confront is the one that Japan must accept perfectly in the future, sooner or later, even with a firm conservativeness that makes the Japanese people keep the attitude of exclusiveness to people from other countries as the Japanese residents. So when you pay visit to Japan, you just give it a try to drop by a Japanese convenience store in a big city like Tokyo. You may be surprised with non-Japanese staff standing around the cashier counter who speak perfect English. So recently, manpower shortage in manual labor with low wages tends to be made up for by non-Japanese residents coming from Southeast Asian countries or India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. And moreover, foreign companies practically send people from their country to subsidiary in Japan, and there are many foreign companies in Japan that exists diversity with expats, with many expats. And this phenomenon has been outstanding, centered on the hotel industry recently. So recently, a student abroad from Russia who came to Japan to enter a very famous Japanese university has outstandingly increased. I don't know why. Of course, the speed of assimilation to diversity in terms of this immigrant acceptance is very slow in Japan compared to other countries. But we Japanese are slightly aware of the fact that we are on the way to accepting the fact that Japan becomes the melting pot country like Western countries eventually in the future. So that's why conservative assertion that supports the idea that deports all the foreign residents in Japan back to their home country with no excuse has significantly intensified in the Japanese society, especially in the internet social networking forum sites. So what they're really worried about the most in terms of this situation is terrorism and extreme vicious violent crime that may happen if Japan accepts the many immigrants by lowering the standard of Immigration Act in Japan. But for now, I think it's quite difficult for Japan to change the situation and change the social stream and social trends, even with the power of political measures in order to maintain economic power of Japan when we see this Japanese economic situation and when we see the successful example of a country that is really successful with an immigrant acceptance policy like Dubai and Singapore. I think this is going to be a destiny. And there is one decisive factor. There's one decisive instant that I cannot help thinking this way, which is like, I I recently met non-Japanese married couple living in Japan for many years, and they were originally from British, and they had two children, and they had two daughters who were born and raised in Japan, going to a Japanese public elementary school. And very interestingly, two daughters looked Caucasian, perfectly Caucasian, but they spoke no English. They spoke only Japanese, even though their blood was totally from British. Now, according to two daughters, they think they are Japanese themselves. They are perfect Japanese. They think themselves they are Japanese. And they live in Japan as a Japanese. And they look Caucasian, so they have fatal identity crisis in their mind between their appearance and their inner mind. So when I saw this situation, I thought Japan should make a single step forward to the attempt to make people accept diversity truly, to normalize this situation.